and a warm welcome to all of you to this fourth episode of Play It Forward. Now, what is Play It Forward? It represents all of you. It is a series that Magic Bus India Foundation does to capture what it is in sport that makes it such an empowering medium and helps to build resilient communities, but also transforms young lives. So, Play It Forward is all about this potential of sport. And thank you for joining me today in this fourth episode. The last three episodes have really captured a lot of young people who have participated in it, sports people, people who have also addressed issues of gender and gender barriers through sports. So it's very encouraging for me. And this episode is very special also because it not only has all of you, but it comes a month after the national sports policy that has been launched. It was long time coming, but I think it has not disappointed any one of us. Far from it. It is highly encouraging and it's such a positive step forward in how we need to unleash the power of sport. On that note, let me introduce everyone to this set of wonderful people in front of us. And I think I am a somewhat, I think, emotional because I represent Magic Bus, and who I have on my screen today is the founder of Magic Bus, Matthew Spacie, who actually thought of sports and sports for development when nobody even thought it possible, necessary, or desirable priority on any of the development agendas. So I think that makes this episode doubly special. The second reason why it is special is we have Nandan Kamath, who is the co founder of Sports and Society Accelerator. And the reason why he is special, rather SSA is special, is because long before the sports policy came into being, they thought it important to start working with the ecosystem and creating a vibrant ecosystem that nurtured sport in every way and linked it to social development. I think that kind of ecosystem work was really missing, and SSA or Sports and Society Accelerator came forward to address that very felt gap. एक और रीजन है जिसके लिए ये स्पेशल है is because who we have with us is Kajal, our very own champion from the Madhya Pradesh program, who has been a part of the sports journey. A 17-year-old who is now qualified for Kabaddi National. She's a young athlete, a fierce one, and that's why she's a raider in her team, in her Kabaddi team. And I think she's come a long way, and somewhere I feel that she literally represents every part of what the national sports policy embodies. And that's why she is a great mascot for the policy itself. And therefore, Kajal हमारे साथ आज थोड़ी सी बातचीत करेंगी उनके जर्नी के बारे में. मैं एक एक करके काजल सवाल पूछूंगी आज. And to start with, I'm going to go to Matthew because that journey began 26 years ago. And that is where I'm going to ask Matthew that 26 years ago, when you started thinking of sports and sports for development, where there was no formal policy, how did you start building that narrative? Why was it even considered important by the partners, by the ecosystem that existed at that point? And what shapes your own belief on the power of sport?
So I think thank you, Dhanashri, and thanks. Great to be here and joined by such great people on this panel. Thank you. I think there was very people really often expect a really big power answer to this, really, but it was really very iterative, and I don't think there was any great plan to ever set about trying to establish sport as a development tool. I mean, we're looking over our shoulder. No one in the world, let alone India, was using sport in that manner. I think I remember reading once about the Matari community in Kenya. There's a football program there, and they were sort of starting to think about how that might be used for social change. But there was very little. And in Bombay, in Mumbai, it was a city which is a huge city, but of now over 20 million people, but very few people in India and in Mumbai had experienced any sort of sense of formal activity, formal sports. I think the number was something like 9% of, the country in those days had actually experienced any formal sport. And so, I mean, the very sort of platform of sport was so new, and to be honest with you, held very little interest to many people beyond the sort of the Indian cricket team, of course, who had recently won the World Cup. But apart from that, really, it was very different. There were sports bodies like Sport Authority of India. SAI was there. They were of course focused on excellence, and there was very sort of fledgling sort of structures of what there are. The sort of the sort of what's in place today. But for us at Magic Bus, it was really just about I guess playing a game. In those days, it was rugby, and really over me. We just had the sort of Nelson Mandela speech of how sport can change the world, and I think all those things we'd heard and learnt about the benefits of sport were starting to permeate through the system, but there was no real sort of, I don't think it was in any way organized or intentional in those days. There was no word such as sport for development, which is now, of course, a huge thing that we champion. So it really was, in many ways, it was full action research, right? So you're really doing things and seeing and observing how people were changing based on the inputs you were giving through, in those days, rugby. And so, and it was, of course, those manifestations for me were hugely impactful, and I hope for the children, the young boys that were playing those games in those days, that made me more inquisitive about how do we try and make this link between what we were doing on the pitch and what was the outcome of those young people's lives off the pitch. So I think that really for me was, and we were, which maybe talk about the challenges later, but it was really difficult when you sort of say early partners. There really were very few early partners because when we started talking about working with extremely marginalized young people in sport, I think it was highly trivialized, right? I think there was a lot of questions about why are you doing this. Young people don't need sport, they need education, they need food, they need jobs. And so this very idea of the methodology or the platform of sports as a development tool, I think it took a long time, possibly 5-10 years of really trying to understand how we articulate the connection between sport, mentoring, and the development outcomes we were trying to reach. And that meant that we and other organizations trying to do the same thing remained quite small because there wasn't a lot of partnerships that we were able to go and find. So so it was obviously, it's very different now. We'll talk about then and now, but yeah. So the answer is, it's a very new development. I said, apart from SAI, I mean, I'm not, the NSDF I think had just been formed. We certainly didn't have organizations like Kalo India. Some of the structures we have now. So it's a very new business industry, if you like, in India. Probably, it's a 20-25 year. And so in the trajectory of things, that's also a very limited amount of time, and we're still playing catch up now. But that was sort of, that would give you some sense of the background.
Yes. Thank you, Matthew. And those are interesting points and a great segue because we're talking. You mentioned the transformation from pitch to people. You also talked about how the approach had to be evolving because hardly anyone was even considering this as important, and often it was trivialized against other priorities that existed. But I think you very critically spoke about how do you articulate the connection between sport and development that leads to any tangible long term outcome. And that's where Nandan, I think, Sports and Society Accelerator has been working on this for some time. Uh, of course, there are a lot more partners that are talking about sports for development right now. But even then, it was important we're still on that journey to build the long term outcomes and the outcomes framework, which is that you are experimenting along with UNESCO on physical activity and sports. So I think on that note, I want to ask you the question: what did it mean to shift the conversation from a very athlete-centric approach to an ecosystem builder kind of an approach, or rather build the ecosystem that supports all three pillars of what has been now articulated in the national sports policy. So, Nandan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Wonderful to be here. It's an honor to be on the same panel as Matthew, of course, and Kajal, who's really a shining light for the future as well. This is why we do what we do. I think just very personal journey to start with, not that different from Matthew. For me, as a young person, I played cricket. I played pretty serious cricket, and it gave me identity, it gave me confidence, it gave me friendships, and all of these experiences I would not have got from sport. But as I grew up and went into my the education system, which in some sense limited my continued involvement with sport, I was very puzzled, just at a very personal level, very curious on why sport had remained so marginal in the national development conversation when I saw it so intrinsic to my personal development. And I think that was the trigger for me personally to get involved in the things I've done. I've practiced law and I see structures evolving. I work with setting up Go Sports Foundation, which has really worked on the sports excellence layer, trying to get our Olympian and Paralympian athletes supported, successful, and in some sense thriving. That was an arc and journey of its own, and we saw that arc. I wouldn't say completing, but certainly growing. It's reasonably easy in our country to to people on why sports excellence is important and winning is important. Uh, we had a journey to traverse on just talking about the fact that talent does exist in our country. When we started Go Sports Foundation in 2007-8, there was a lot of cynicism on whether we had talent at all. So very similar questions to the ones Matthew got in terms of, are you wasting your time? Is this worth doing? We've completed that arc, and India does have talent. There's no doubt about it. The reality is that whether talent or not, uh, the aspirations of a country are much more than just winning medals. Aspirations are to live wholesome, thriving lives. And that isn't just about excellence. It's about social development, about economic development, about livelihoods, about gaining from all of the experiences one has in a life. And that was the motivation to think about sport very differently, to appreciate the value of sports excellence and see what role the notion of excellence can have in the daily life of India, but also look at social developmental aspects as well as the economic developmental aspects. And how do you bring all of these together? Because in many ways, sports excellence has been seen as almost an enemy of social development, in the same way that the growth of cricket has been seen as counterproductive to the growth of others. And I'm not sure there's that duality. Both of these things can grow together and, in fact, in many ways contribute to each other. So, Sports and Society Accelerator was about widening that conversation and recognizing that an ecosystem grows as a whole, not in single parts. And in many ways, building what we have as a sports stack approach, you have tech stacks, and we have built an approach which looks at the whole ecosystem as one stack which thrives together. So, whether it's participation in sport or sports excellence, there are common layers that we can actually evolve and develop, which contribute both to sports excellence as well as sports participation and development. And those were the triggers. We're still very early in the journey, very excited to see lots of the ideas come through in sports policy. But at the end of the day, sports policy is as good as the practice. And that's the journey ahead. And we're very eager to get our teeth into the practice of sports policy as much as lots of our ideas are now in play.
Yeah, thank you, Nandan. I think, yes, a lot of that is going to be about bridging the policy to practice process. But I think you made an important point about the movement or the trajectory, which by no stretch of imagination is linear from participation to excellence to development. This is not a linear journey. And I think it's more about the ecosystem starting at those different entry points and making sure that the opportunities and access is provided for people to either even just practice sport or excel at it, or even use it as a medium or a pedagogical approach, as is the case with Sports for Development. Yes, completely echo that. On that note, I'm going to invite Kajal. काजल, जो अभी बात हुई हमारी, एक तो मैथ्यू जी है, उनके साथ बात हुई जो जिन्होंने मैजिक बस शुरू किया, और 26 साल पहले उन आपके जो अभी चुनौतियाँ आपके सामने है कि मैं अपने गाँव से कबड्डी के नेशनल स्टेज पर कैसे पहुँची, तो मैथ्यू ने वही कहा कि उनकी चुनौतियाँ 26 साल पहले वही थी। कि स्पोर्ट्स किसी के लिए एक कोई महत्वपूर्ण मीडियम या कोई भी चीज़ एक प्रायोरिटी एजेंडा पे था ही नहीं। कोई ये मानता भी नहीं था कि स्पोर्ट्स में बच्चों को भाग लेने की ज़रूरत है, एडल्ट्स को भाग लेने की ज़रूरत है, स्पोर्ट्स के लिए अपॉर्च्युनिटी देने की ज़रूरत है। ये कन्वर्सेशन 26 साल पहले बिल्कुल नहीं था। तो उसको शुरू करना और उस अप्रोच को डेवलप करना, जो कि अप्रोच हम अभी जो प्रोग्राम करते हैं मालनपुर में आपके वहाँ पे वो अप्रोच अब हम ज़मीन पे उतारते हैं बच्चों के साथ। तो वो अप्रोच कैसे 26 साल से बिल्ड हुआ? नंदन जी ने फिर उसके ऊपर ये कहा कि अभी हमारे पास स्पोर्ट्स पॉलिसी है और उस पॉलिसी में बहुत सारी चीज़ें लिखी हैं, जो हर एक चीज़ को मायने देता है कि सब बच्चों को, सब युवाओं को खेलना चाहिए, एडल्ट्स को भी स्पेस चाहिए प्रैक्टिस या खेलने के लिए। पर सब लोग एक कोई प्रतियोगिता में उतरेंगे या मेडल मिलेगा, ऐसी कोई ज़रूरत नहीं है। इट बेसिकली मीन्स कि सबके लिए स्पोर्ट्स एक ज़रिया हो जाता है, एक अच्छी ज़िंदगी जीने के लिए, फिट रहने के लिए, हेल्दी रहने के लिए और मेंटल वेल-बीइंग के लिए। ये सारी चीज़ें आपने भी प्रोग्राम में एक्सपीरियंस की है। तो थोड़ा-सा मैंने ये कन्वर्सेशन रिकैप किया है और अब मैं आपसे पूछना चाहती हूँ कि जहाँ से आपने शुरुआत की, पहले तो हम इतने प्राउड फील करते हैं, इतना गर्व है आपके ऊपर कि इतने छोटे उम्र में आप नेशनल स्टेज पे इतनी सारी चुनौतियों को पार करते हुए वहां तक पहुंची है। तो एक तो पहले तो बिग बिग कॉन्ग्रेचुलेशंस, बहुत
थैंक
बड़ी
यू।
उपलब्धि है ये।
थैंक यू।
एंड इस उपलब्धि तक पहुंचना मुझे पता है आसान नहीं था। तो थोड़ी-सी वो जर्नी के बारे में, वो जो आपका एक पूरा डेवलपमेंट रहा है, उसके बारे में थोड़ी-सी बात कीजिए। कैसे शुरू किया और कबड्डी कहाँ से आपकी ज़िंदगी में आया एज़ अ स्पोर्ट?
मेरा नाम काजल गुर्जर है। मेरे पिताजी का नाम हरेंद्र सिंह गुर्जर है। मेरी मम्मी का नाम सीमा गुर्जर है। मैं गौहर डिस्ट्रिक्ट भिंड मध्य प्रदेश में रहती हूँ और मेरे स्कूल का नाम नालंदा है। मेरी कबड्डी मेरे दादाजी पुलिस में थे, एसआई पोस्ट में। तो
हाँ।
वो एक एथलेटिक्स प्लेयर भी हैं अच्छे, तो उनको ही देख के मैंने सोचा कि स्पोर्ट्स में मैं कुछ करूँ।
हुँ।
तो फिर मैं नालंदा स्कूल में पढ़ती हूँ, तो मैं वहाँ पे अजय सर जो मेरी बस के एक वो एम्प्लॉय हैं, तो उनको वो सेशन लेने आते थे वहाँ पे
हुँ,
नालंदा
हुँ।
स्कूल में। तो मैंने देखा, तो मैंने उनसे पूछा कि मैं ये कबड्डी जॉइन कर सकती हूँ? उन्होंने कहा कि आप जॉइन कर लो। तो मैंने कबड्डी जॉइन करी। फिर उन्होंने मुझे जितनी भी उनकी हेल्प हो सके उन्होंने हेल्प की मेरी। और मैं फिर टूर्नामेंट खेलने गई, पहले स्टेट, ब्लॉक, फिर संभाग, फिर स्टेट, ऐसे ही फिर स्टेट से मेरा नेशनल हुआ। नेशनल में जाके मैंने मेरा हाथ फ्रैक्चर हो गया था नेशनल में जाके, तो फर्स्ट वाले नेशनल में मैंने कुछ कर नहीं पाया। फिर मेरा प्रैक्टिस हुई, अजय सर ने करवाई, पवन सर ने भी करवाई। तो प्रैक्टिस के बाद मैं अच्छी प्रैक्टिस मतलब ट्रेनिंग के बाद फिर दोबारा फिर नेशनल हुआ मेरा, तो उसमें मैंने अच्छा वो करा प्रदर्शन।
अच्छा, नहीं बहुत बढ़िया है। पर ये ज़िद आपके ऊपर अंदर कैसे आई? केवल दादाजी को देख के कि वो पुलिस में थे, वो गेम्स में पार्टिसिपेट करते थे। तो कभी आपको ऐसा नहीं लगा कि मैं ये कैसे करूँगी या मैं लड़की हूँ या मेरे पेरेंट्स सपोर्ट करेंगे कि नहीं? तो वो कैसा अनुभव रहा?
मैंने और लड़कियों को भी देखा, मतलब वीडियो वगैरह भी देखी और लड़कियों की कि वो
हाँ।
खेलती हैं। और हमारे यहाँ पे भी सर ग्राउंड चलाते थे, देखा अजय सर को खिलाते हुए, तो उसी वजह से मेरा मन किया इसलिए।
अच्छा, नहीं बहुत बढ़िया। थैंक यू सो मच। एक चीज़ आपके जर्नी से या आपका ये पूरा जो डेवलपमेंट रहा है, उससे मुझे समझ में आती है कि आपको अ, एक प्रेरणादायी कोई व्यक्ति का होना, बहुत जरूरी है कि जिसको हम रोल मॉडल कहते हैं। दूसरा, कोई है जो ये काम, जैसे आप पवन सर, अजय सर का बात कर रहे हैं कि आपको रुचि तो थी, पर उस रुचि को और बढ़ाने में किसी का सपोर्ट भी चाहिए, ये भी चाहिए। और तीसरा, मौका चाहिए। तो आई थिंक ये आपके आपने जो कहा इसमें से मुझे जरूर समझ में आया। एंड ओके, सो नंदन, टर्निंग टू यू, जो अभी काजल ने कहा, वो सारी चीजें एक तरीके से, दीज आर इंग्रेडिएंट्स टू मेक दैट शिफ्ट हैपन, whether it's an opportunity, it's access, it's role models, it's also experiences and platforms to play, to showcase talent, but just to find safe open spaces to engage in sport, or even mentors who are going to help you believe in yourself, which brings in also the role of life skills with sports. These are all ingredients which still are not as valued as they should be, and which is why, just as your report says, not much of this funding comes into supporting sports, whether for excellence or for development. And that conversation is shifting only now. So how do you make sure that we are able to leverage the policy tailwinds to start moving the conversation in this direction, get the required funding, and also reach out to the most underserved pockets of India where there is probably talent waiting to burst out, and there are also young people who simply want to engage in sport?
Yeah, no, thanks for that. It's a very important question. And I was reflecting on what Matthew said earlier when he talked about Mumbai and only 9% of Mumbai indulging in any form of sport. Realistically, across the country, that percentage has not changed while our population has grown. It's still, if anything, in double figures of how many people actually play sport or have that sporting experience. There are many reasons why someone may never get access or may lose access to sport. They could be urban settings, it could be change of life circumstances, it could be economic, it could be social. And there is not going to be one single answer to solving these. At the same time, the change in positionality of sport, I think, plays a very significant role. Moving from marginal in the national development discourse to reasonably mainstream. And that is the exciting thing about this national sports policy. It isn't sport just for sport's sake. And the next phase is about connecting sport in all of these different conversations. If you look closely at the national sports policy, it suggests a whole of government approach, which also talks about a whole of development approach, which is connecting. The sports ministry puts out the vision, but its location is across health, it's across livelihoods and employment. So we need to make sport work in the national conversations in the places where it also matters. Could it be jobs and livelihoods? Is sport going to be driving many more jobs? Certainly has the possibility of doing so. Can increased physical activity impact preventive healthcare? And those are the sorts of conversations that change it from being sport as entertainment and sport as marginal in the day, non-priority, the things you do after you finished your homework, after you finished your job, to actually central to how we look at solving the large problems that our country has, which is keeping ourselves gainfully employed, including people who otherwise perhaps would never touch sport, but also never touch many of the social and economic development opportunities that come through or alongside sport. And those are the shifting conversations which are exciting in policy, when sport becomes instrument of development, not just sport for its own sake. I believe sport has value for its own sake in general at a personal level. But if you are talking about moving the conversations, you have to see the power of sport in delivering whatever outcome you want, whichever department you're placed in. Sport has something for you, and that gradual recognition of sport as a very sharp instrument in not only hastening existing outcomes that you want, but perhaps often bringing new outcomes that you would have never thought possible in your context. And those are the shifting conversations which, to me, bring sport frontline in developmental conversations.
Yeah. So imagining the outcomes that are possible, articulating them in a way that becomes central to the development agenda, and also unlocking some of the value of sport that is not so instantly perceived. It's not very apparent or obvious the first time that one might have a conversation on sport with anybody. So I think on that note, Matthew, checking with you that now that we are here after those 26 years, today in 2025 with the sports policy in place, what according to you are those three or four things the ecosystem still needs? So again, like Nandan mentioned, it was to trigger those conversations, and that is how we started shifting the narrative. Today, we are in a place where many more organizations are playing it forward, many more organizations are engaging in sport, using sport. However, there is still some distance to go to actually shift the narrative, as well as shift the levers such as funding, development priorities, open access, etc. So, what more, according to you, are those critical two or three things that the ecosystem still needs?
So I think, and thank you, Nana. That was really, yeah. I thought, I think this idea of, it becoming part of the national discourse and all those things that now will happen, right? Because I think creating, making this a systemic issue, right, rather than it being sort of localized to to some of the sort of the work that's going on with good organizations like ourselves, but ultimately we're not going to make that much impression in terms of impact unless it does become national discourse. um, and I think from the policy document that I've seen, I think it certainly makes the headlines of that, and the inclusion in all facets of government is really encouraging. Um, but again, I think a lot of this will lie in the success of this will lie in how this gets actioned on the ground, and I think this is what we is yet obviously to will yet to be seen. I think I'd like to see particularly more work done for participation. And one of the difficulties we've had, and I'll specifically talk about Kajal and girls, is that you put these things out there, and unless there's direction and directives about how half our population women get to participate in that, I think it can be interpreted in many different ways. And there still are deep concerns, I think, about access about bias, which is actually quite, if you start looking at some of if you look at the rising stars of of India, the women have tended to be far more successful. The Sanya Mirzas, the Mary Coms, the Sanyas, the Mitalis. The women have progressed incredibly well in the sporting arena, and I think a focused, laser sharp focus on ensuring groundswell participation from women. I remember when we were in Dharavi starting out, and I remember Dharavi being a big community in Bombay, and remembering that the trying to get to the girls, a Muslim population, and the mothers, the mothers were really upset with the fact that their young girls were being asked to come out in shorts and play football. And so we formed a mothers team, and the mothers then suddenly started to understand, and they let their daughters go out, and the daughters went on to do incredible things. But then the grandmothers said, "We've never done this before," and they became they started a football team for the grandmothers in Dharavi, and this became an enormous community tournament. But this is just seeded from that idea of access and giving that space for for participation to be safe. And I feel that over time there needs to be really good guardrails about this, not just being leaving it to its leaving that gender conversation without the specificity of some of the things that would need to happen to make sure girls get a fair chance at the participation and then thereafter the excellence. So that's one thing I think I'd like to see heavily promoted, and it makes all the sense in the world given that the talent we have with women in India, Kajal being one of them, of course. And maybe the next thing I would also, this is great to see the national sport policy tie up with national education policy. I feel that is potentially for us, one of the biggest opportunities to see how we integrate sport with the education policy and how we are able to really execute. I think the ability for Education India to be trained, to be educated, to build a culture in their schools where sport can do all the things that we've just talked about on this podcast, in terms of the social inclusion, the economic benefit, and to help build community. And I hope that's, I'd love to see, I'd love to see that, that opportunity really proliferate. And I feel that for me is a sort of a huge thing that I would like to see. The last thing as well, I mean, I think Nandan touched on this, is the whole area around investment. And this happens when you hear the groundswell of community, but it also happens when government policy directs it. It's very, very challenging. And these are great words in this policy document. And the government has, of course, a good purse for this. But we do need to find people who are willing to invest in the grassroots movements of each and every one of these sports. I speak to so many corporations and individuals, and still there is great reluctance to invest in in the community base, the participant base that will ensure that we are able to grow sport in India. So they're the three areas I think, Dhanashri, that I would be sort of be focusing on. I think it's too early to say concern, because I feel this policy has come out. I think it's a month old. I think, and I think it's an excellent document. I think it will be, I'm sure, fine-tuned over the course of the next few years to to respond and react to the needs of the people who are both delivering up and participating in it.
No, well said, Matthew. I think the policy has just come out and it presents a very good roadmap for us. I think it's the milestones that we put on that roadmap that's going to determine, as Nandan, you said, the practice that would happen after the policy on the ground. And that's going to require things that, Matthew, you highlighted. One, where does the agenda sit within the system? So is it a systemic concern at all? Is it a system-led priority? The second is, are we linking sports with citizenship and community building? And the third is, of course, the investments. So I'm going to briefly go to Kajal and then hand it back to all of you to say your last thoughts before we round off this conversation. तो काजल, अभी जो बात की हमने, उसमें हमने ये भी कहा, और मैथ्यू जी ने ये कहा कि लड़कियों को स्पोर्ट्स खेलने का चांस बहुत कम मिलता है. कभी कभी घर से सपोर्ट नहीं होता, कभी अपॉर्चुनिटी नहीं होती, कभी ये कहा जाता है कि आप इस तरह के कपड़े नहीं पहन सकते स्पोर्ट्स खेलने के लिए, शॉर्ट्स और इस तरह के कपड़े, क्योंकि हमारे कम्युनिटी में ये कोई नहीं पहनता. तो दो बातें आपके साथ कहनी थी आपको कि, और यारादा पूछनी थी, इज दैट एक, जब आपने कबड्डी खेलना शुरू किया तो आपके लिए, आपने कहा कि मैंने दूसरी लड़कियों को देख के शुरू किया, तो ये जो रोल मॉडल्स हैं, ये जो बाकी लोग जिनको हम देख के ये स्पोर्ट को पसंद करना शुरू करते हैं, ये आपको ये रोल मॉडल्स कहाँ से मिलते हैं? मतलब आपके इर्द गिर्द लड़कियां खेल रही थी, वो आपको पता चला, तो एक तो ये बात है. दूसरी, जब आपने खेलना शुरू किया, अगर आपको घर से सपोर्ट नहीं होता तो क्या आप इतना दूर जा पाती? और तीसरी बात, जैसे आपको प्रैक्टिस के लिए बहुत समय बिताना है, हो सकता है होमवर्क कभी पीछे छूट जाता होगा क्योंकि आप प्रैक्टिस में ज्यादा समय बिता रही हो, तो कई बार पेरेंट्स को, फैमिलीज को ये भी लगता है कि अरे पढ़ाई पीछे पड़ गई और स्पोर्ट्स के पीछे हम लग गए, तो ये भी होता है. तो इनमें से कुछ चीजें आपके साथ भी हुई, और अगर हुई तो आपने इन चीजों को किस तरह से हैंडल किया, किस तरह से उसमें से रास्ता निकाला? क्योंकि जो रास्ते आपने निकाले ना, वही रास्ते किसी और लड़की को भी ये सोल्यूशन चाहिए होगा जो आगे स्पोर्ट्स खेलना चाहती है, और वो आज कह रही है कि मुझे भी काजल बनना है. आप एक तरह से उनके लिए एक उदाहरण बन गए हो, है ना? तो आपने इन चुनौतियों का सामना कैसे किया, वो अगर थोड़ा आप शेयर कर सकते हो. और आप आगे वाली लड़कियां जो कबड्डी में आना चाहती है, कोई भी स्पोर्ट खेलना चाहती है, उनके लिए आपके क्या 2-3 सुझाव है कि गिव अप मत करना या जो भी आपके सुझाव है? और मैं ये भी जानती हूँ कि आप एक रेडर हो, मतलब आप फियर्स हो, आप रेड करते हो, आप मौके पे चौका भी लगाते हो, तो वो आप जिंदगी में कैसे लगा रहे हो उस मौके पे चौका, वो भी बताइए मुझे।
मैम, जब मैं 5 साल की थी तब मेरे पापा का ऑपरेशन हुआ था, उनकी दोनों किडनी खराब हो गई थी। तो फिर मेरी मम्मी ने उनको एक किडनी डोनेट की, तो तब मेरे पापा अक्सर हॉस्पिटल जाया करते थे। मैं घर पे बड़ी हूँ, मेरा एक छोटा भाई है, तो मतलब कि मेरी पढ़ाई पे भी दिक्कत आती थी, मैं घर पे अकेली रहती थी और मुझे अपना भाई भी सँभालना पड़ता था, घर के काम भी करने पड़ते थे। तो फिर मेरे पापा-मम्मी की तबीयत अभी भी खराब है, अभी मैं पापा हॉस्पिटल में मेरे। अभी मैं यहीं पे ग्वालियर में हॉस्पिटल में पापा मेरे। तो मतलब अभी भी मेरी पढ़ाई पे प्रॉब्लम आती है, पापा काम करना पड़ता है, घर का कबड्डी भी खेलनी पड़ती है, बहुत सारी दिक्कत है। और मैं उन लड़कियों से ये कहना चाहती हूँ कि वो पढ़ाई भी साथ में करें कबड्डी के साथ और अपना एक गोल सेट कर लें और कबड्डी या अदर उस स्पोर्ट्स में जाएँ पढ़ाई के साथ, तो अच्छा रहेगा। अपना लक्ष्य एक बना लें, उस पे फोकस करें।
थैंक यू। बहुत बड़ी बात कही आपने कि चुनौतियां तो आती रहेंगी और हम आशा करते हैं, दुआ करते हैं कि आपके पिताजी, आपकी माताजी बहुत जल्दी ठीक हो जाए और उनको अच्छा स्वास्थ्य मिले। ये आसान नहीं है जो आप कह रहे हैं और ये बहुत सारी लड़कियों की चुनौतियां है कि घर के काम संभालना, अपने छोटे भाई बहनों का ख्याल रखना और फिर एक एस्पिरेशन या एक होप रखना कि मैं स्पोर्ट्स, मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगता है स्पोर्ट, बट मेरे पास समय नहीं है टू हैव द leisure time or the luxury to indulge in sport is equally something that we have to recognize, especially when girls are balancing triple or 4 times more the responsibilities perhaps at home. तो काजल, बहुत धन्यवाद कि आपने फिर भी समय निकाला और आपका ज़्यादा समय नहीं लेंगे क्योंकि आप शायद हॉस्पिटल वापस लौटना चाहती हैं। Thank you so much. And on that note, I think any last words from you, Nandan, on where do we go forward from here? And what does the roadmap look for you over the, let's say, just the next 1 year? Which are the milestones that you're really looking forward to?
The thing that really continues to excite me is the magic of sport, and I know it's there in your corporate name as well, Magic Bus. That is the sort of it's a secret sauce. I don't think anyone's really figured out what it is, but sport has that magic, keeps us excited. To me, the things that are uh, driving forces are also themes that Matthew talked about a little bit. And we've been familiar with the digital divide for a bit, is access to digital services and digital products. But there is a physical activity and sports divide which isn't talked about that often. It's seen as luxury, it's seen as leisure, it's seen as the extras. So it's fine if that divide continues, but I think it is not fine. And learning about the interrelationships between the physical and sport divide, which is those who have sport and those who don't, the gender divide. And increasingly, this is going to be layered on top of the digital divide, where technology is going to be the bridge that actually brings more people together. And even the access to technology and divides there are possibly going to even exemplify and deepen divides in sport and physical activity. And it's something I want to keep track of quite closely, because at the end of the day, it's not about who wins and who loses at the national level. It's about every single person touching sport and having the chance to experience that magic. And for me, it's a reorientation of what that report card looks like in our academic settings. I know we want to connect the national sports policy to the education policy. It's all about the A's, but in sport, it's about the F's. It's about the fun, the friends, the fitness, and the feedback in the community that you get. So I think those are that report card for me is a very different report card from the A's, and recognizing that it's such a core and essential requirement in living a good life is having a strong relationship with your body, getting enough physical activity, and layering sport on top of that. I mean, that magic of sport being a public good and something that everyone has not just the ability but also almost a right to access. those are the things that keep me up and excited about what lies ahead.
Excellent. Very, very well put. And I like the idea of situating this in the context of well-being, which is a priority for many, but never recognize that sport is equally required, and bringing up the F's rather than the A's, and this becoming more an approach to a better life, better well-being, and not to forget that there is a connection between the divides that we see, the gender, the digital, and the SAPA, that is sports and physical activity divide. And like Kajal rightly said, समय है क्या मुझे sports में जाने के लिए, और वो इसलिए भी नहीं है क्योंकि disproportionate burden of chores, disproportionate burden of care is also on her. So that is the plight of most of the girls. So to not forget that that gender divide is very real, which disallows or is a barrier for many girls who may be talented, who may have just sheer interest to engage in sport, but never the opportunity or the time to do so. So thank you, Nandan, for that. Matthew, any of your last words? And
yeah, absolutely. And I think, more power to these platforms, right? Because I feel, as I said, it's not just about national policy, but it's also about groundswell, from people and community upwards. So I think fantastic. Let's do more of them. I think, I was just listening to Nandan as well, and we were talking about the gender agenda, and I was reflecting. It would be, it would be. I just wonder also, if we were to have a female sports minister. I don't think we've ever had a female sports minister. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dhanashri, but I think that gesture, not just a gesture, but ideas like this, which would then bring that lens to solving some. It's very difficult to really understand unless you've lived through it, right? So I'd love to see some movement politically like that. And I also feel the last thing I'd say as well is that I see, beyond the sort of the policy documents, what's happening on the sports fields now. I just was in India last month watching the rugby, Premier League rugby, and for a sport like rugby to be televised, to have all the commercial partners that needed to be going, it's happened to Kabaddi, it's happened to football. Of course, the IPL is there. I do see a groundswell of these new opportunities for. There's a table tennis about to be launched. I know there's a badminton and a tennis, but I think the media play a huge role in democratizing the idea of sport, and not just about being excellent, but also just about the participation. So I've never felt more positive than I do at the moment about what is happening to our industry at the moment. So that would be my last, with the caveat that I'd love it to be led by a woman.
that's a beautiful aspiration, Matthew, and I do hope that in the coming years we see that fulfilled, even as India aims to host a 2036 Olympics. Um, and on that note, thank you all of you. It has been a wonderful conversation, and we will keep stirring, Nandan, that secret sauce to make sure that more magic comes out of it. It is almost like the manthan of the secret sauce will lead to more magic coming out of it, going by the scriptures and history that we have had in India. I do want to say, Matthew, go ahead.
No, just Nandan, I think, what's really interesting for India at the moment is that, and I sit in Singapore with the view that we're trying to understand how to put sport for development and sport into other Asian countries in the way that we have. India has such a head start compared to the regional canvas at the moment. And I think I just sort of thought about, this idea of, that, this is such a positive thing for our country, right, India, that we have this ability. We are so far ahead in how we're thinking about sport in comparison to pretty much every other South Asian and Southeast Asian country. So I think there's a huge opportunity not just to think about sport and India, but sport India as a regional hub for propelling some of these great ideas around sport. So I just wanted to throw that in at the end, Dhanashri.
Yeah. So India as a regional hub, India as also working with other countries on sports for development. Therefore, the conversation that Nandan, that you're championing, which is about sport being a public good as opposed to a luxury or something that's a privilege of the few. The focus on sports and citizenship, the focus on sports and well-being, and to make all of the connections that we need to make, while being fully mindful that there are many divides and many barriers that have to be consciously addressed, very intentionally addressed, to be able to make sure that we do become the sporting nation that we want to be. In every sense of the term sporting, which is not sports for medals, but sports in every other way, just a physically active sporting nation where sport is available and accessible to all without any discrimination whatsoever. On that note, we are also on the eve of 79th Independence Day for India. So I think we must all aspire to remain and continue to thrive as a spirited sporting nation that is able to provide that opportunity to each one of them, as also guaranteed in the Constitution of India, that everyone needs to have the opportunity to engage, not just have education, but to have holistic well-being. And if that's to be nurtured, it's that's to be taken forward, then sports and physical activity and just everybody engaging in it has to become a part of everything that we do. So it's as routinized as that. It starts with early on. It also starts in schools, and therefore the connection with national education policy and a great step forward where physical education has now been made compulsory across classes, including right up to grade 12, is a great step forward to say that you cannot ensure holistic and complete education if physical education is only considered a free period in a school where we could engage in anything that we feel like. That structure has to come in early on, and girls like Kajal have to find platforms, have to find opportunity, have to find mentors, and have to be emboldened with life skills that they need. Today, Kajal, when she speaks so confidently, आप इतने कॉन्फिडेंटली बात करते हो और इतनी चुनौतियों को का सामना करते हुए आगे बढ़ रहे हो, इसका मतलब ये भी है कि आपकी जिद, आपका खुद का एक सेल्फ रेजिलियंस बहुत हाई है, खुद का एक बिलीफ खुद में जो होता है वो बहुत हाई है, और ये कोई छोटी चीज नहीं है, इसके लिए हमको एफर्ट्स करने पड़ेंगे. सो intentionally investing in confidence, in resilience, in belief in self, in some of the things that you learn so much on the playground, just on any playground. So, yes, with that, I'm going to call it a close to this conversation. Thank you for joining us here, and please do keep playing it forward. More power to your efforts, and let's hope that we meet again uh, for more conversations around unlocking the magic in sport. Thank you so much. Much appreciated. Thank you so much.